Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Value Driven Show today. I'm very happy to have Prakash Kewalramani with me today. We're going to discuss moving from being data driven to being value driven, and that's something. If you heard me before, you probably have heard about value driven, and that's a topic where I've met, let's say, Prakash in our thought process a few months ago. Um, Hi, Prakash. Thanks for joining the discussion today. I'm really happy to discuss to have you share your insights, your experience, and your approach on that path, becoming data driven and then value driven, and talking about what you've been working on in defining a framework for organization to help adopt that, called the Data Value Framework. So, welcome, Prakash. Great to have you.
Thanks, Nicholas. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to um, express and also share my experience with the data driven as well as value driven. As you mentioned, definitely we will focus on the value driven, but we will also cover a lot of aspect of how do we move from data driven culture to the value driven culture. Thank you and appreciate everybody's time today.
Awesome. So maybe we can start with. I don't know if you want to tell a bit more on your background on how you came to it with that, or maybe we can go on the way as you like.
That's fine. I can start. I have been, I would say, data veteran for like last 30 years now. Started my career as a programmer, and then became an architect, and then enterprise architect. I have a TOGAF certification. That's where I started understanding the whole data-driven culture. Being part with a lot of vertical industries like defense, manufacturing, media, finance, reinsurance, and each and every industry is unique by itself. But when it comes to the data culture or a value culture, I believe at the end of the day, businesses are looking to transform their data into a value which can become an asset at the end of the day, and how these assets can help them move further from the economics perspective. So today's topic is very dear and near to me, so it'll be fun. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And again, I think that concept of value driven is still fairly new on the, let's say, on the scene, and that's something where we, let's say, met each other on the need to educate and to move toward that. Um, so so let's go. And for people attending, please don't hesitate to add your comments in the chat directly, whether you're in LinkedIn or YouTube. We're going to take question live if you have any question for Prakash or myself. So really don't hesitate. So I think let's start with. I think one of your main things is what are the roles involved in that journey and in that path.
Yeah, so the first slide is a little bit of, I'm sure it's not surprising to anyone, because when it comes to data, data leadership plays a very important role. And this particular role has been evolving since last, I would say, 8 to 10 years now as a data leader. You can call them as chief data officer, chief data analytics officer, from the security perspective, CISO. But the idea here is I have reflected two kinds of sides to this when it comes to role of a data leader. One is the leadership side. In the side, what happens is a data leader is a change agent, in the sense like, you can start rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I say change agent means, as today's topic is like how to become a value driven, considering digital transformation or AI transformation. So transformation plays a very important role in a value driven culture, because We talk about people, we talk about process, we talk about technology. Data is in the center, but I would like to reflect more on the value of data in the center, because everybody knows data. Like, we have been dealing with data since like 1960s, 1950s. Of course, the volume, variety, velocities, they were all different that time. But as and when we are in a social media world, we get tons and tons of data from, like, let's say, sensor data, from uh, information from different kind of social medias, Facebook, their sentiments, value plays a very important role. So data leader needs to act as a change agent, because um, if we are not acting as a change agent, that means the transformation piece of in the entire calculation here, that has been missed. Our role is to make sure that when we are bringing the digital transformation in our organization, our role as a data leaders are to ensure that people are adaptable, they are not scared for any changes, because the biggest failure for any digital transformation project or initiative is people think that something is going to change which I'm not trained on. It's a new skill. AI is a new skill. I, in fact, personally don't call AI as an artificial intelligence, to be very honest. I call it alternate intelligence. That means AI is just a supporting piece to humans. It cannot replace human. So being a data leader as a change agent will help here a lot. The next point here is, how do we articulate the vision to the team? Now, this again revolves around the the value of the organization. So what's the actual difference between a data driven organization and a value driven organization? Data driven organization is based on data. That means I have the data, I need to monetize the data from the analytical perspective. And then once I have the data in the format where business can understand, I start monetizing it. And that is definitely a data driven culture. But the piece that I wanted to talk and the framework is about is, how do we now map those data driven cultures, or map those data driven endpoints to a value driven endpoints? Because from the business perspective, we are always, from this IT side, from the data side, we always talk about data. When it comes to data, we are in front line. We
Mm,
know what is data as a data leaders, right? And we assume that when it comes to business, they are responsible to drive the value. 100% agree. I'm not denying that. Business is responsible to drive the value back to the organization. But how do we now map? We need to work with the business folks as a partner. So, this is my data that is coming in, and this is the value that you're bringing out. How do we map these two? So, to articulate this, vision is very important. And this is what I learned when I was working on TOGAF framework.
mm,
Vision, it plays a very important role in the initial phase of any architecture, whether we talk about business architecture, data architecture, network architecture, enterprise architecture. If there is no mission and vision attached to it, then down the line, the data is lost. So the third point here is to provide support to the executives. What do I mean by that? So, as I said, like, let's assume that we are in a conference room and we are talking about business here. We are talking about the value here. What kind of initiatives business should take? For example, um, decrease the cost or expense, increase the revenue, increase the customer satisfaction, decrease the risk. All these are metrics that are measured from the business perspective. But now, within that same room, if we have a data leader sitting, they come with the perspective of, these are the metrics that are associated ultimately with the data, because data can come from various places. Data can come organically within the organization. Data can come from our partners, our affiliates, third party. So not all data is critical. We have to keep in mind. We have to weigh the data. Which data needs to be associated with what kind of value we are talking about with the business. Now that's data. That's basically a leadership side. The data side here is we are providing the data value to the business. That means when we talk about data value, it's just not the monetization of the data that we have in our systems. It's we go all the way back to the domain value or the
Mm.
raw data layer, and we'll cover that because within the data value framework model, um, there are different layers, and we will cover that soon. From providing the data value to ensuring the company's data projects are profitable and performing well. That's the next point. When we ensure, when we are coming up with the uh, company's projects, and there can be, of course, not necessarily only data projects, right? There can be multiple projects within the organization. But here we are only specifically focusing on what are companies' data projects and how it is going to be profitable. Because there are times I have seen in my own personal experience that we do get the data from outside, but maybe 10% or 20% of the data is applicable when it comes to the KPIs. Um, so this is how we have to basically ensure that when we are ingesting the data within our data value framework, that I will go over quickly, maybe in some other slide. I have a detailed slide for that. But how do we ensure the company's data projects are performing well? We have to have the endpoint. We have to make sure that every point when the data is moving, the ownership of the data is also moving. So we need to align those two. The last point here is pulling the data in the center of the golden triangle. I spoke about people, process, and technology, and imagine data being at the center.
Mm.
Not only the data, the value of the data being in the center. Because once we have the data, we will automatically will get the metrics and the KPIs from the data, whatever data we have it from the business perspective. But what value that data is bringing, because ultimate goal for any data leader should be to see data asset as one of the intangible asset in the balance sheet. There are very few organizations where you can literally see the data as an asset or data as a liability as well in the balance sheet. But can we say that we want to live in a world where every balance sheet should have a data as an asset or a liability? Why not? Because if data is there and data is growing and data is driving the business value at the end of the day, then why we cannot put data as an asset in a balance sheet?
Oh, great intro, and I really like how you touch, many of the things, also have been talking a lot in terms of how do you start from the top and the business needs to drive the transformation and to drive vision, drive alignment, and really help supporting that within the organization. And at the other hand, making sure that what people are doing on the field also connects to that, what we kind of lineage. And for me, it's really it's always really important to think about that and not have those two things like disjointed. One on one hand we talk with the business, on the other hand we work on data. So that's good. Maybe I come back because I always have question on. I know you're going to talk more on the balance sheet part afterwards. So because that's always many questions about that. How do we evaluate the value and how do we track that? But that's interesting. So um,
Yep.
yeah.
So let's go further now. Like how we are going to um, traverse this journey. I call it a data journey. So there are two ways to look into it. There is bottom up, which is this is the other way around. Usually, when we say bottom up, this can be a little confusing slide. When we say, whenever we say bottom up, we always think about the data. To be very honest,
Yeah.
because that's kind of the at the at the bottom of the organization, and top is always the business part of it.
Business.
I
Yeah.
have just flipped it a little bit from the perspective of the value, as this session is about value driven culture. The perspective is little bit different, but it doesn't matter how you look at it. You can look at it the bottom up approach or the top down approach. The end of the day is the business outcome is the most critical aspect for any business. How do we do that? How do we map it? Now, the way we map it, we can either come from the business outcome. We'll say that, for example, I wanted to increase the revenue for 2024, or reduce the risk, or increase the customer experience, or improve the customer experience. That can be a business outcome. But how do we measure those business outcome? We need to identify those KPIs, business KPIs, because now this is where we start thinking about the data monetization. Because when we have the data, we convert that data into a KPI, and that basically reflects the business outcome. But within that KPI, if we dig a little bit more, what's there? It's a data, which is ultimately an asset. And I will cover some of the features of the data where data can be a liability, which is a very interesting topic by itself. But let's stick to the asset for simplicity perspective. So once I have the data assets, ultimately those data assets are coming from the raw data. So this is basically going through the fact that once the data is curated, right, right from the raw data to the KPIs, the same data can be used in different use cases. Okay, the same data can be used from the sales perspective, a marketing perspective, and also call center. You know, so the idea here is we are not going to change the raw data. It's like, I mean, I'll give you a very weird example of I always relate data with food, because it's so easy to relate for me. Because I can make, with the same sauce, I can make different kinds of pastas, right?
Mm.
And in fact, I can use this sauce in pizza also, right? The outcome is different every time, but the raw data can be same. So this is very important, and this is where the value comes into the picture. Yes, I have data, but what value I'm bringing from that data to achieve a different business outcome, that's the key behind it. We can go to the
Yeah,
next.
that's kind of also a way of looking at incremental value when you add new use cases, and be able to reuse that asset or that raw data that become assets into more use cases. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because what happens is, now let's say that I have a data coming from third party. Okay, um, let's say I'm Netflix, and my third party can be ratings from Nielsen, or some other third party rating company. Now, I can get what my audiences are liking, what shows they are looking at, what kind of a ratings they are providing. But then in the mix, I can add more data to it, so that I can combine the external data and internal data for a different experience, customer experiences,
Mm.
right? Same thing I think Amazon Prime is doing, Amazon is doing. Like, you always see that, okay, now people are also viewing this product. And how many times you have realized that, okay, you are looking for a product, for example, if you are shopping for a for a television set, and then you'll say, okay, now I need 80-inch TV. I need OLE based features, and then DOLE based features. And then you see Amazon is providing more information that people also view these kinds of televisions. You start getting the ideas. So it's a mix of data that is actually coming to us, and we are making those decisions based on that. Yeah. Okay.
No, that's awesome. So maybe yes, the next point is based on that, how do you actually measure the value? So that's a great topic, I would say.
Yeah, so from the
Different questions.
measurement, from the measurement of the data value is now, again, keep in mind, this is not the data monetization, or this is not the KPI. This is not the measurement of the KPI. Those are given. We have been doing this for many years. This is measuring the actual data value that is coming from, or maybe coming organically or coming through third party. So, for example, business initiatives to maximize the data value. When we say that business initiative means everything starts from the business use case or business outcome. If we are thinking, or maybe we are proactive in thinking that how we are going to maximize the data value in order to uh, achieve those business outcomes or business goals, the measurement becomes a little bit more obvious, because, as I said before, the each and every data value has a different weightage. I can have 100 different sources coming from data sources that is coming from different third parties or organically. Now, out of those 100, obviously not all of them can be, like, weighing from the weightage from, like 10% to 100%. Some can contribute probably 5% of my business initiative. Some can contribute, and I do have a working example at the end where folks can look at the practical approach on the implementation of this data value framework and the enterprise architecture solution from UE. The second is the improving operational efficiency.
Mm.
Now, there are different types of data. So now think about this. It is just not the business data we are talking about. There can be a metadata within a data. Now, metadata plays a very important role from the lineage perspective, right? What is the impact? What kind of a metadata we need to capture, so that it is just not the business efficiency, but it is the operational. Because at the end of the day, if I am providing the data on time within the SLA to the business, that itself calls for better making decision, because timing is everything,
Mm.
right? As I gave you the example of the Amazon shopping experience. What if you get that information after you have done, after actually you have actually bought the television set, after you buy the television set, then it comes to you that, people also viewed this. That's too late, right?
Mm.
Because this is the metadata we are talking about. During your decision time, when you are getting all this metadata, which help in improving your operations, that's also piece of the data, and we cannot discount that. And that also has a metadata, also has a value to contribute at the end of the day, from the business outcome. Third is the productivity through automation. um, we talk about AI here. This is a very good segue to talk about how our AI models are helping in the automation. So when we have a data and we are feeding this data into our machine learning model, we are going through, for example, um, supervisory machine learning model, unsupervisory machine learning model. We do the pre-processing. We go through the inverse of the entire model. Then we do the post-processing. We evaluate it. We measure the accuracy. All these are part of the automation. How this data is boosting the productivity through this automation. Now, again, we are feeding the data, which is good. This is what we do. We are good at. We are feeding the data to a preprocessor when it comes to machine learning or deep learning. But what kind of a value the data is bringing, which will map to the value to the model itself? Because any organization can have multiple different models. Have you thought about how do we basically now add a value to the model? That means this model is coming up with some kind of a predictions, which will ultimately will increase the business operation, and it will maximize the data value to the business initiative. But how we are going to measure that value in the model itself, we will that it is going to be too late to measure the model value if we don't have the methods to measure the data value that is feeding into the model. The next is reaching out the new audiences. So this is again the measurement of the data value. How do we ensure that what are the different uh, patterns, or what are the different methods to reach out the new audience? uh, Again, we might get the demographics value data from a third party. Let's say we are running a campaign, and we wanted to now we have released a product which is targeting age group from let's say 15 years old to 22 years old or 30 years old, whatever the range is. Now we have the audience here, we have the range of audience. How do we reach out? Now we have a data because we bought it, the third party data from the from the demographics perspective. For this particular zip code, how many folks are in that particular range. But ultimately, when the campaign is successfully executed, what is the value that we actually ultimately brought in to start with from the data sources perspective? The next is improving customer satisfaction. So this is basically a no brainer because customer satisfaction plays a very important role when it comes to value driven governance, because um, we have different avenues and different ways from the customer satisfaction here also. When we are this basically completes the feedback loop. After we have provided the service to a customer, how we ensure the customer is satisfied. That means maybe through survey results, or again through third party data that we bring in to improve our product or a service. So again, we attach a value to that particular data, that okay, maybe this can be our business initiative to improve the customer experience. The last is the innovating through research and development. So augmented research plays a very important role because when something is new, fresh to the market, that means the market has not seen the product. Of course, everybody gives the example of iPhone. When we went from a flip phone to the iPhone, market did not see that as a smartphone. It was an experimented research, and Apple thought, okay, this is going to work, and it really worked. How did Apple came into a decision where okay, now they have to come up with a smartphone? Okay, through some kind of a data, from the research data, from the experience where we were complaining when we were using the flip phone. We had only probably what, 20 buttons on the phone, there was limited display. Of course, BlackBerry was a hit that time. It was for corporate purposes only. It was not for, you know, layman. BlackBerry used to be, okay, this is my corporate email. This is I go. It is secured. Uh, it had a beautiful display. I was able to see all the emails, but we never used to have apps that we used to have it today. So what smartphone brought in? Smartphone brought in all different apps. How these different apps are helping now? It is bringing different data to us. We are looking at a different data every time. And in fact, our brain works so fast. Think about it. We calculate the data value within few seconds without even realizing that we have actually calculated data value for that particular app. But it goes like in between the lines, it doesn't firms it, it doesn't confirms it, that okay, this is the data value that is actually bringing it. We know there is a data value behind it, but we don't see it when we go to our day-to-day work as a data leaders. We don't see it, that we have to go back to those sources and start calculating the data value that's bringing to our applications. Yeah. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Uh,
Sorry, I was talking with mute. And I think that's interesting to think about those different ways. Data value can be, let's say, materialized here. Maybe one question is, how do you help? And maybe you touch that afterwards, but sometimes the question with that is, how do we, back to your point before, how do we quantify that, or how do we then articulate those value to back to the business?
right. So, excuse me. From the mapping perspective, so think about this, right? At the end of the day, the business knows their outcome very well. Business know what is the goal, why they have to take this initiative, right? Now we can break that down, the goal of the business, into probably actions.
Hmm.
Now, when we break those actions, and I think I have covered in one of the slides here, when we break those actions, now every action has the owner for that action. So that means every action has different properties. One is the process property, the technology property, and then of course there is a ownership from the people's point of view. And the fourth property is the data property to that particular action. So now think about this particular business goal, and this business goal has got 10 different action, and each action has all these different properties. Okay, and one of the property is a data property. So that means where this data coming from in order to fulfill or complete that action, so that once that action is completed, it meets the business goal. So let's take a very simple example. There are 10 actions, and let's put a very simple weightage for those each and every action. 10% for each action. So there are 10 actions, 100% business goal is met. Now, business goal will not meet unless all these 10 actions are complete on time, within the quality, as well as ensuring that the measurement of those values for the business has been uh, provided. So, in order to map each and every action to the data is a simple task, and we always do that. But what we don't do is to map the value to the data, right?
Yeah.
So that means the data can have, like, let's say the business goal is to increase the sales for, let's say, a retail company um, by 10% in 2024. That's a goal. But how you are going to increase the sales? And I'll come up with 10 different action items in order to increase the sales. Probably I will run a local campaign, I will run a promo code, I will introduce new products. These are all different actions you have to take in order to meet that goal. But each and every action has a data associated with it,
Mm.
because without data we are not able to complete that action. So now,
That's yeah.
yeah, so once we have that data, now how do we, now the trick is, now how do we find what is the value for that data? And I'll cover that in the next in I think 2-3 slides.
I think your next point is always that question about, is my data more value, an asset or liability or investment? How do we deal with that? So I think that was interesting question. I see you mentioned Doug Laney here. I had a webinar with him a few months back.
Right. So here I call this as a data meter, right? So if you look at the data meter here, how do we identify whether our data is a liability, just an investment, or actually an asset that keeps on giving us a return on investment, right? Now, let me give you a very simple example. Like, um, let's say the organization is collecting the personal data, right? Now, for example, credit card, um, social security number, or any other identifiable information. Now, what if that data is breached, right? Is that data an asset anymore? It will turn into a liability, right? So we have to be very careful when we are classifying the data. We have the idea is to convert the data which is at a state where it can be a liability, it can be an asset, or it can remain as an investment, right? So for each and every aspect of the data value framework, when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to data protection, these are all different components of data value framework, where you want to ensure that you don't want to turn your data into a liability. It can, it's in nobody's hand. And like, there are many examples of data breach, and it will in future also. I would say that there will be data breaches, um,
Mm.
and nobody can say that there will be no data breach at all. There will be, but the idea here is how you are going to traverse through this particular meter and make sure that how you're going to convert that liability with the asset. Simple examples is data protection by design or data privacy by design, making sure the data is in safe hands, making sure the data is well secured, is it's encrypted at rest. It's encrypted when data is traveling from one point to another point. So these are all different building blocks of data value framework. And the important point to note here is, when it gets into a point where you have already augmented the data, enriched the data, you have structured the data, now it start looking into the data as an asset, right? And then how that data as an asset is reusable every time. So the more you use, the better the data or more refined the data will become, because the more you will look at the data, the more you understand the data, the more you understand the usage of the data, more value it will bring to you.
And so one question maybe, because a way I look at it usually is to say you need to understand the kind of usage of the data, target usage of data, and what you're going to do with it, or what kind of value you want to achieve, to also assess how much effort you need to put into protecting it, or all those protecting the liability, to kind of balance how much you invest in security, in anonymization, and so on, based on what you want to do with the data, because it's always, kind of a balance, as you say, between how much risk do I have versus the value. And so, yeah, I don't know what you think about that. And maybe the second question is, I believe that the kind of same principle also apply to the next layer, which is AI, in a sense, because then we have how we deal with data being a liability or an asset, but then also how we make sure that our AI models or machine learning models are an asset more than a liability. And then at the end, how they, back to your initial point, how they deliver outcomes for the business or support decisions for business that will help them deliver outcomes.
Yeah, you're bringing out a good point, because when it comes to giving the data uh, to the machine learning models, in order to generate the predictions, in order to generate the decision trees, um, we have to be very careful. What is the universe of that data? I'll give you a very simple example. An organization can have, um, from the HR perspective, from the salary perspective, the organization can have only one SVP or one EVP, and 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 we say it's okay to share the data to the data scientist, and the salary of that one EVP in the organization, or maybe two or three senior leaders in the organization. The universe of that data is so small, it is so easy to understand this salary belongs to which person in the organization. But the universal of the data can be huge also. Let's say that you have the different subscriber in one particular zip code, and we know that what is the age group of those subscribers. Now the one particular zip code might have probably thousands and thousands of subscribers, and then when you're giving that data to the data scientist, the data is not exposed, the PI is not exposed. So we have to be very careful in order to provide this kind of a data, because that can turn into a liability. uh, we think it's an asset, but when we are providing the smaller universe of the data set, that means we are exposing the risk of personal information to our data scientist or data analyst. Now this person already know uh, which data we are talking about, whose data we are talking about. So it is very important to have the AI related privacy policies in place. And as and when we are providing the data, we need to basically ensure that we either mask the important elements of the PI and then provide the data to the data scientist, or we can um, change some kind of a properties of the PII so that it works as not necessarily kind of a sample data. It's actual real data, but the identifying properties or identifying information within that actual data has been shielded, right?
Yeah, and that's always a tough topic, because I saw this morning there was a kind of an exploit where people managed to trick ChatGPT to expose its own training data with a lot of private information. So sometimes, it's the more you expose it, also the model, the more you face some kind of risk that requires some more investment on to avoid becoming a liability. So that's always I think back to your initial point. Yeah, I think it's need to start with the end goal and who's going to use that, what's going to be the actions taken, and then assess what investment needs to be done to prevent things being a liability.
Right.
So I think your next point, I actually, use
Yeah.
ChatGPT to help with
Yeah, so I'll skip this slide and the next slide, because I was just experimenting with Chat GPT. What is the definition of data
yeah,
as a liability, data as an asset? I mean, anybody can go and check this,
and
so
check
I'll
that, yeah.
just skip those. So this is the interesting data collection I have, and this is regarding, there are like 3-4 slides related to the investment in data. So there is a trend that is going on. So some of the trends that I have captured in terms of the slides, for example, here, um, data modernization is people are investing, the companies are investing more in the data modernization from the initiative perspective. And also, if you look at what is the principal challenge to become a data driven culture, people, process, organization, it's a principal challenge that is around almost 80%. And if you look at the technology, technology is not limited anymore. That is no more a challenge. The important challenge to have this whole data driven culture or a value driven culture is revolve around the people, process, and the culture itself. You can go to the next slide. So these are some of the slides which gives you a little bit of more kind of a flavor. Is, for example, um, in 2012, the CDO and CDAO appointed were like only 12%. Now it is almost 82%. So if you can look at the data leadership roles, it is obviously changing because we are moving from data driven. Before, we were just moving from it was purely a value driven culture. Then we adopted the data driven culture. Now we are doing a mapping between the data and the value driven culture. So right now we are in a hybrid mode where we don't want to lose the value, we don't want to lose the data. We want this culture to be data driven, we want this culture to be value driven, but we have to make sure that we associate that value to the data. And if you look at this here, the reporting relationship also, the CDOs are start to report sometimes CFOs also, because CFOs also are interested in seeing what are the data assets, if there are any opportunity like intangible assets, to show that as a balance sheet. Because uh, especially in mergers and acquisition, the companies are looking at the balance sheets. They are looking at a lot of tangible assets, but they are looking at a lot of intangible assets like trademarks or patents, or what kind of a data assets the companies are holding. Because as and when more companies are becoming data driven, these data assets will come into as an intangible assets in the balance sheets ultimately.
Yeah, that's really, I mean, and I would argue that in all cases, even if the CDO, CDAO are not reporting to the CFO, they need to build strong relationship with them to go through that valuation exercise and making sure that even when you report incremental value and so on, so even on the way to going to balance sheet, you need a lot of prep work and working closely with the CFO to articulate that quantification basically of financial impact. And indeed, I like the fact that we see the growth of the CDO role. What is missing here, I think, because there's a lot of, for people who don't know that surveys, there is a lot of interesting numbers there, is the shift from the CDO role and the CDAO role also evolving. So moving from just being chief data officer, but also moving to chief data and analytics officer, because that's also, I think, a very value driven path, because first it was just as building data as an enabler, and now it's also looking about really how it's going to be used and how it's really a transformative power. So that's both a detail and I think something much more deep in terms of how it's actually impacting organizations.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, here is some of the skill sets that I have displayed. This is again from newvantage.com. And if you look at that, the CDOs, they are interested in um, having some level of data science skills, data analytical skills, data governance, so that they can understand data better, the value of data better, so that they can guide their team. As I said in the beginning, that data leaders are the change agent, and they should be able to articulate the vision to the team and also to their executives. So it is very important for them to have these kinds of skill sets, because um, it you having a business related skill set is good, but I don't think so that's enough when it comes to
Mm,
a data driven culture. Because if we don't know, as leaders, as a data leaders, the value of the data that is coming inside our organization, or we are creating the data within our organization, what kind of a data value are we creating? And again, if the data is turning into a liability, or if the data is turning into an asset, we have to be very mindful and we have to be very careful. Because if we are not putting all those guardrails in place, the data as an asset can turn into a liability within within a time of fraction. Because if we don't guard the data properly, these are valuable data, this help our business outcomes. And if we don't guard them in a restricted way or in more governed way, then the same data can hurt us, and the same data can increase the risk, and that will increase the cost and the reputation of the company.
yeah.
Yep, this is again another a benchmark where it talks about what is the primary focus of the CDO. As you can see, the innovation and the growth is it's at a very high level right now, and the
It's growing.
yeah, it's going up. And then from the success of the CDO or CDAO role, if you can look at it, it is evolving in the sense, the reason why it is evolving, because more and more companies are moving towards the data driven culture. And then companies who are already at the data driven culture, now they are moving into the value driven culture. So the more and more companies are mapping the data and its value to the success of the business outcome, the success of the overall CDO role is also improving.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting to see that some numbers from 22 are going down because I think some had like early success of delivering value, but then they struggled with like scaling that or being consistent with delivering that value. So now they reviewed their expectation and saying, oh, actually, we struggle more than what we believed. So that's also an interesting step back. So um, I think because we are we're almost reaching to the end. So I think it's a good time to kind of wrap up with a data value framework model that you've been kind of
Yeah,
touching.
I think I have already covered that in one of the slides where I was talking
Yeah,
about the top down and bottom up. You can skip
yeah,
this one because this just shows the pyramid version of it. But if you go to the next slide, it'll give you yeah, go to the next one. I just wanted to cover
yeah,
the framework here. Yeah, so this is my version 1.0 framework. So if you look at it, at the top, we have the liability, investment, enrichment, and the asset. So it's a path, it's a journey. The data can come as an asset to start with, but if the data is coming as a liability, so data will become liable only when there is a data breach. But
mm,
as long as the property of the data is defined, classified, and make sure the you have a proper data strategy in place, and the data quality, data security, which falls under the data driven culture. This slide, I like this slide because this give you a exact differentiation between what is a data driven culture and what is a value driven culture within the organization. So companies has been they've been focusing on metadata or data classification, their data strategy, the quality of data, privacy. But what we need to do is now, and then there is another set of the organization within the same company, they more focus on the data analytics and the data products. The reason I wanted to bring this slide together, I wanted to make sure that there is a mapping between the data driven and data value driven culture. Because it's because unless you are not classifying, or unless you don't have the data strategy in place, unless you are not producing a good quality of data, your data analytics results, your KPI, your data monetization will hurt. And at the end of the day, data as a product will not be um, as purified or as classified as business want to use as. So if you look at on the left hand side, the vertical part of it, we have discover, we have measure, we have action, and the output. Those are the four swim lanes that comes within the data value framework. I'm not going to go each and every bullet point here, but the bottom line here is, for each and every swim lane, and for each and every components where you can see the data all the way from data classification to data product, there are some action items that we need to take. And then from those action, how do we measure it? And then how do we come up with the outcome? I'll give you some of the examples here. Let's take data strategy. The outcome of the data strategy is, you come up with the data lineage, you come up with the business process automation, and then I'll skip all other um, the components. I'll go to data product, which is again very interesting. As far as the data products is concerned, what is important is the awareness and the training, and also how do we monetize the data, which will impact the customer relationship, which will impact the data value, which will impact the culture. All these things are part of the data assets. So as you can see, as data is moving from a liability, as soon as it comes and lands into our uh, you know platform, data platform, it moves, the ownership of the data also move. But then when we are curating the data, we are moving the data from liability perspective, investment perspective, we are enriching the data, and ultimately we are making data as an asset. When we make data as an asset, the value is determined by that time. uh, if you can go to the next slide.
Yeah. But don't want to change. Yeah, here.
Yeah, so this is basically the combination of the value which comes from the data value framework, which is the implementation and the foundation of the data product. So the idea here is, when the data enters into the platform and when data goes out of the platform, within that particular journey, data becomes the product. Think about the assembly line. So if you go to any manufacturing assembly line, the raw material comes, it goes to each and every assembly line, and it changes a form to some point at and then from that point onward, it again rechanges to another form and another form till it becomes a final product. Data is exactly like that. Data comes as a raw data. But why we cannot think from or maybe why we cannot learn from the Six Sigma, right? Six Sigma was particularly made for manufacturing company, right?
Yeah.
Right from the value of the raw material all the way to the final product. How do we determine, when we let's say you are in a car manufacturing unit, how we determine the value of the car? What are those parameters? What are those components that say, okay, now this car is $35,000 or $50,000? How we determine that? Of course, the brand makes a lot of difference. There are a lot of aspects to it that makes a difference. The demand and supply makes a lot of difference. Those are all good parameters to determine the value of that automobile. But ultimately, the raw material, what is the raw material, how much it cost, what is the value of the raw material, then what was the value of the assembly line, as and when the car goes from one particular assembly unit to another assembly unit, it changes. It changes the form. Similarly, the data is also changing. Data goes from liability to an asset. When it comes to as an asset, as a data product, it has a value, and it ties back to the raw material, ties back to the raw data. What is my domain value? What is my raw data layer value, information layer value? What was knowledge applied? What is the value of the knowledge? What was the decision layer? What was the value of the decision? So if you combine all those values, this is where you get the value of the data. You can quickly go to, I know we're almost on time. So this is a simple example of. I thought maybe this slide was to complete, to understand that what is the implementation part behind this whole data value framework. So I just wanted to make sure that we have this example where, imagine that we have the head of operations who has the business goal to reduce the operational cost. Okay, in order to reduce the operational cost across all their business areas, we, as I said earlier, that we need to state the decision is to basically lower the operational cost. This is basically action. So if you look at what are different action, we need to ask what is needed to make this decision. So these are the points. For example, so the beauty of all these steps, as I discussed before, we have a goal, we have multiple action. All these can be entered in UE tool, in the sense like this is where the enterprise architecture solutioning comes into the picture. This tool has the ability to provide, to create these actions that are ultimately connected or mapped to the business goal. And then if you look at the layers, I'll start with the bottom layer, which is the domain layer, which is the transactional data. Okay, and all these layers can be uh, can be entered within the tool. So once you say that, okay, this is my transactional data coming from the OLTP system, for example, it can be CRM system, it can be HR system, finance system. From that information, it goes to a data layer. Okay, so that means what is the analytical data from the OLAP system? From there, it goes to the information layer. What are the historical and future operating costs by business? Now, if you see, they start seeing that from the information layer onwards, we are looking at our journey to the goal. What data do I need to my knowledge layer? From the knowledge layer, what are key contributory contributors factors to the cost? What are actually factors that are contributing to that particular cost? Which business has the largest future cost? And at the end, we have the decision layer. How do I reduce my operating cost? Which business areas or the function do I target? So in the beginning, it sounds like, okay, we have a business goal, but when we split that into small components and doable tasks, each and every layer opens up with a value within it. And once we have defined the value, this framework will help us in determine what is the ultimate value of the raw data that is underlying the main decision making capabilities.
Yeah, so very interesting, and thanks for the wrap up, on UE, because indeed, so you really break down the approach, and from the very beginning, how do we map things, and then how do we make sure that we connect those expected outcomes and the decision we take back to the actual raw data, or what the data AI analytics teams are doing, because at the end you need those connections to be able to help them building things efficiently and making sure that you prioritize the right thing. So thanks a lot, Prakash, for this session today and walking us through all of that. I assume there is plenty of things we could spend a lot more time on going into the details. As you saw, we skipped some things. If any of you have questions or want to continue the conversation, please reach out to Prakash or myself directly on LinkedIn. It's easy to connect with any of us, and and would be happy to give you more details on the data value framework or on some of the things we've been talking about today, and of course on UE on the other hand, and how we help also animating that process and making it practically working, making the collaboration across all the different people involved, across the different layers, across different parts of the organization. So and hopefully it has convinced you on the need to walk that path, from being data driven to really being value driven and driving your strategy from there. Maybe you want to have a last word or conclusion, Prakash?
Yeah, sure, definitely. I would say thank you for all for listening into this, and absolutely, I do have a website called datavalueframework.org. There, you will be able to see model and the architecture behind it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And in this session, what I did not cover how to actually calculate the actual value behind this. Maybe we can have a separate session for that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to cover the basics and fundamentals of what is the journey that will look like going from a data driven to the value driven, because unless we don't understand and convince ourselves the data can be an asset in our balance sheet, then the entire data value framework will not hold true. And that's one of the reason I did not cover the implementation part of the data value framework. What I have covered is I have provided the different components that are involved in bringing up the data value framework, but each and every component has a result, and that each result brings the value and it calculates the value of the data sources. um, um, yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I can be reached out via LinkedIn messages, and happy to help there.
Yeah, I know. I'm pretty sure you'd be responsive and helpful for people, for anyone interested. So thank you again. Great content. Hopefully it was insightful and inspiring for people to the next steps in their journey. Have a good evening, everyone, or good day, depending on where you are in around the globe, and talk to you soon, Prakash.
Yep. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for doing this.